Thank you everybody for joining us today. Welcome to our 4210 webinar. After much delay, we all believe this will become reality this month. And we have we're very fortunate to have some very key industry leaders to dive into the 4210 impacts. And I'll go down the list here. Our panel today, Brent Giese from Daiwa Capital Markets America, Tom Mchugh from JVB Financial Group, and Jim Schroeder from Baird Fixed Income Capital Markets. So I will turn it over out of the gate here to Brent to give us a little bit of a kickoff with a few words about himself and his firm in Daiwa. So take it away.
Sure. I appreciate it, Greg, and I wanted to thank the entire Agile team for having us on. This is an important topic, to say the least, and it's been ongoing now for officially about 10 or 11 years, and actually there were rumors about it as much as 18 years ago. So glad to be here. If people don't know me, I'm Brent Giese. I run the mortgage origination sales group at Daiwa Capital Markets. This is my 38th year in the MBS business, 37th year of covering the mortgage origination industry. So a lot has changed since I came into the business. In fact, I was reflecting on my very first trade back in 1987, and I was trading Ginnie 15s. That's 15% Ginnies. They were physical securities back then. And literally after I did the trade, I had to go to a custodian bank, pick up the certificates, walk them across Manhattan, and deliver them to another custodian bank. So if you ever want to get an adrenaline rush, feel free to take a couple $1 million of Ginnie Mae 15s and walk them in a duffel bag across Midtown. But having said that, just to go briefly through what I've done on the street, I started at JP Morgan, worked 6 years there in the mortgage banking team there. Moved over to UBS, a little different environment there, focused more on servicing hedging. They had a big swaps book at the time. Was then subsequently hired by Bear Stearns and spent 11 years at Bear Stearns from early 1998 to implosion in 2008. So that was an interesting period of time, and spent a lot of time on the non-agency side of the equation during that time, and also got involved in Bear Stearns' mortgage conduit, EMC, if you guys remember, and was in charge of the correspondent sales group for that as well. I then moved on to Mountain View Capital and was involved in buying distressed loans after the financial crisis. Moved on to Janney Montgomery, and I came to Daiwa in 2011. I've been here for 13 years. We've built out a pretty good group. We have 4 salespeople in the group, and we cover 450 mortgage originators. The focus is generally agency, with a fair amount of balance sheet for that business. We've got about 11 billion in balance sheet that we put towards TBA and spec pools. So at any given time, we might have an inventory somewhere around 7 billion. By about $1 billion a day in TBA. And recently we launched a whole loan brokerage operation that services the originators that we cover in about 100 buy-side accounts. If you guys are not familiar with Daiwa Capital Markets, I'll just give a couple highlights there. We were incorporated in 1964, and we became a primary dealer in 1986. So about 38 years, right around when I got into the business, Daiwa became a primary. The fixed income group, pretty simplistic. We focus on treasuries, agency mortgages, corporates, and agency debt. And I would say the distinguishing factor with Daiwa is that we're a primary, but we play very nimbly, and we go down the curve a little bit with our in terms of the size of our clients. So we really do service a wide spectrum of clients. So the Agile system has been great for us, and we appreciate the business we've received on that and the opportunity to talk to you today. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Brent. Tom, take it away.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks, Greg. My name is Tom Mchugh. I run the mortgage group here at JVB Financial. I started off my career in fixed income at Morgan Stanley, working in the fixed income group in the 90s. I went to the buy side / sell side, going to a hedge fund when it was founded. It was a Highland Financial Holdings Group. So I had a buy side, sell side experience. Was there for its duration, founding in 2000, all until the financial crisis. And that's where I started this group here at JVB Financial. And the idea of it was to create an agency MBS capability for the broker dealer that would really organically kind of build out that aggregate MBS capability. Instead of going back to the street and looking to cross bonds, we looked to see if we could build out a capability where we actually service the mortgage issuers directly. And so that's where we organically started to build out those relationships from what I call middle market mortgage issuers, ranging from $1.5 million in equity, very small fledgling what I call bankers, out to the much larger entities. And the way we service those clients are really three core businesses. So our first business is TBA, obviously what brings us here today. The TBA business was our first to launch. Dedicated traders in that space are two for us, plus sales folks ranging about 3 or 4. We cover TBA primarily the smaller groups. I'd like to see those what I call the acorns growing into the oak tree. So those that are going from best efforts into TBA are typically the clients there. For us, Agile's been an amazing, ad. We've always said that gives us the jump ball perspective. So from its infancy stages until now, it's something that we've really gravitated towards, and we encourage all of our lenders and mortgage issuers to launch that. As it pertains into the mortgage life cycle, there's really the second business we do is gestation repo. So when we built this business, we built it in a 3-prong effort, was to follow the mortgage loan life cycle from infancy stage all the way through to its pooling. So our TBA is obviously its first format. And again, we focus quarterly on the smaller, I'd say smaller mortgage issuer, but then going into gestation repo, which is a supplement to, or I'd say an advantage to warehouse lending for those that are Ginnie issuers and Fannie issuers. That's our second business. And then going into the last, obviously, leg of business is pool trading. So again, following that life cycle from start to finish. And we're excited here to talk about 4210. As Brent said early on, it's been a long time coming. I joked, and I say it again because I did a speech a decade ago at the MCT exchange about it potentially launching. And I sat in a room full of smaller, back then the exchanges weren't as big as they are today, but no one knew what I was talking about with 4210. Thankfully, it's been talked about much more recently, and we'll get into that in a second. But I can tell you, and we'll talk about that more openly, I don't think it's going away. I think this is something that's going to come to fruition. So again, thanks, and looking forward to the discussion.
All right, thanks, Tom. Jim, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having us, Agile team. Jim Schroeder, Fixed Income Capital Markets at Baird. I've been with Baird for about 7 years now. So pretty much, first thing I learned about when I moved over to Baird was the TBA business and 4210, which is now finally coming to fruition, as my colleagues here have mentioned. Have been in the fixed income markets for about 20 years now. So spent time with Bank of New York Mellon as well as buy side CLO manager. So currently, Baird, we're independent, privately held, self-clearing as well. We've been really growing our fixed income platform over the past decade, really, building out our agency pass-through spec pool, secondary trading business, agency CMOs, and then CMBS as well. Really adding, talented individuals across our trading and sales teams in the securitized product space. So, we're actively looking to grow our mortgage business, add new relationships. We're pretty flexible, being self-clearing and privately held. So, we don't exclusively work with the big guys. We have a lot of good relationships out there, and we're just, looking to build more relationships and continue to grow.
Awesome. Thanks a bunch, guys. I'll give 10 seconds on myself. Greg Vacura, I'm president of Agile. I joined the company almost a year now. It's about 10 and a half months. I previously was at Wells Fargo for years on the Wells Fargo correspondent side. So I know a lot of the lenders in the business, and it's been a great year so far with the Agile team. So let's dive into the good stuff here. Why everyone is here. The 4210 education, and here we go. So Brent, why don't you start us off with a little bit kind of high level status and timing of what's happening and a little bit of the why, and guys jump in as well. But Brent, a little bit of the high level, how do we get here and why are we here?
Exactly. So let me try to do the best I can in a pretty short period of time to give you sort of my synopsis of the timeline of kind of how we got to where we are today, and then we can sum up where we are today. So the first time I heard about 4210, the notion of basically margining forward transactions was in about the 2006 period when I was at Bear Stearns, and my credit guy came up to me and said, I just got out of a meeting and they're talking about margining forward TBAs. And I didn't hear much about it. We went through the financial crisis, 2007 through 2009 into 2010 even, and that sort of was dominating the news. And I don't think FINRA was in a position to put on any kind of major regulations during that time. So when the dust settled, the next time I started really hearing a lot about 4210 was maybe around 2013. And they were starting to formulate, at least from my perspective, and I wasn't in on all the meetings, but they wanted to put in some rules and stuff, but those rules have to go through a pretty strenuous back and forth and making sure that everyone's happy. So in the interim, right around that period of time, you guys will remember 2013, 2014, the street started to do some margining. Had some basic guidelines that we had received from what's known as the best practice group. And they had basically encouraged us to start margining clients. And it's one of those things where we didn't have the regulation, but we were kind of told to do it. So you kind of do it. And so at that time, I'm sure my colleagues did as well, worked with our credit groups to try to create as accommodative a stance as humanly possible, knowing that this was an onerous situation, particularly for mortgage originators who have a cash flow situation there where they could have massive market movement overnight, having to lay out cash that they're not going to receive until settlement on the trade. So I think at the end of the day, we try to do a good job of giving people some rope, whether that would be higher MTAs or higher thresholds, whatever we could do within the bounds of our own credit criteria. And that lasted quite a while. And while we were doing that, they were formulating various amendments to the actual rule itself. And that went through major back and forths, delays. There were many times during the period of like 2014 through 2017 that, we thought this thing was going to happen and then it got delayed. 2017, they came out with kind of a more hardcore 250 MTA, zero threshold type ruling. But when you look deeper in the ruling, there was also a concerning element, which was that FINRA was allowing the lenders to essentially cross-collateralize the TBA exposure with those same clients. So it was a major concern for those of us that don't lend. And I think there was some real big pushback from a couple of firms in particular. I won't mention names here, but there was some legal action taken, and that derailed the situation for a couple more years, made FINRA kind of go back to work and create more flexibility. So it really did result in some good end results, because zero threshold, that's the way we're going to roll. And we're going to let these lenders essentially use margin that they have on their warehouse line, extra margin, and apply it to the TBA exposure. Therefore, somewhat mitigating the need for some of those guys to maybe margin call. That was, in an era where we're trying to even the playing field, we were actually going the other way, because a lot of people who don't lend were having major concerns about that. So fast forward a couple more years, we end up hitting COVID, and that delays things dramatically more, because obviously it was tough to implement anything during COVID with no one in the office. So that delayed things even further. We come back on the backside of COVID, and indeed, some of the rules had lightened up a little bit. They changed the 250 MTA to a 250 threshold, and they also created a mechanism for net capital charges. So that was in lieu of margining people, you could take some net capital charges instead. So that's kind of where we're at right now with the rule. And sort of just to summarize, where we are just today, after all that sort of back and forth over, a period of about 11 years. We currently have a May 22nd target date. That's kind of set in stone. We've defined what transactions will be covered under the FINRA 4210, namely TBA trading, spec pool trading, CMOs, and agency arms. What kind of got kicked out of that was whole loans, agency CMBS, HECMs, Ginnie Mae project loans, things like that. So those are kind of out of it. They've defined pretty much as mortgage originators that you guys will not have to basically worry about initial margin. But as far as maintenance margin, which is the margin we're talking about, mark to market, everyone's going to be on the hook for that. But what they have done is they've changed kind of the premise. And you basically, as far as the regulation is concerned, it is a threshold now and not an MTA. So from a regulatory standpoint only, if you have 300,000 in exposure, what FINRA is basically saying is what's mandatory is to margin call at least 50,000. Now there's problems with that because there's practicality issues. And if you only margin 50, then you're at the top. You could end up with a lot of margin calls back and forth, and nobody really wants that either. And then the other option you have with certain situations is you have the ability as the dealer to take a net capital charge. And they've limited that amount to $25 million. So there is an ability for you to take some net capital charges. But again, I think in the spirit of the rule, it's to be used for more discrepancies between valuation of the margin. So there's a lot there, and there's a lot more that needs to go into it. But from a big picture standpoint, we've really gone from 2013 to 2024, almost 11 years to implement this. It's gone from almost a free-for-all of your credit decides what they want to margin people to you have to be 250 MTA and zero threshold to now reinstating some of the flexibility to allow for capital charges and allow for a threshold instead of an MTA. So they've kind of gone all over the place on this. And right now it's sort of sitting in a place where there's probably more flexibility today, certainly than there was 4 years ago. Maybe not as much flexibility as there was 11 years ago when each firm was making their own decisions about what was the proper way to go. But that's sort of in a nutshell where we're at today.
Sounds good. Tom, Jim, any other comments on the high level from your guys' perspective?
No, I think that was a really good overview that Brent gave. I think one of the specifics that I always say for attendees, I think the takeaway would be of all that we talked about. Always on my mind for the mortgage issuers were two things. One that Brent talked about was this idea of thresholds less MTA, and it's been thrown back and forth. The teeth that people need to think that this, what I'm describing here, all was to take place is no longer, and we'll get into specifics, but I think that the teeth that were put into 4210 was this MTA / threshold. The MTA, minimum transfer amount, was going to be more of the most business prohibitive aspect of this. This is where, if that, and I caught this on the last FINRA call. So this goes back to February. Until that point, the whole world thought this was going to happen. And I asked FINRA to go through the math. And by the way, as an update today, they had the under the call, did the same thing. I gave the math and I laid it out for FINRA reps to answer, which they did. And to go back to that point, so if you are a mortgage issuer, you have $255,000 in exposure. It used to be that 255 once crossed needed to be answered in full. So if you are a mortgage issuer facing anyone on this call, meaning myself or Daiwa or Baird, that 255 needed to be posted. That's what gave me personally most of concern for how do we protect our clients. And that's no longer the case. However, meaning the case, you need to get back to the 250. So broker dealers and counterparties that you're faced with need to get back to that 250 number. Although they do not want to get a line in the sand, so the calls need to be made as much as possible. What we always say is this always used to be a conversation. Brent outlined that also. So it used to be that when I started in this business 25 years ago, margin calling was recommended to be a certain number, and that communication was relayed. So I always use that 250 number if we called for that, and usually they'd send 255 in or 250, and that was fine. If something was going on where cash was light, hey, Tom, can I send you 150? That was okay too. It got you well underneath it. That's fine. We're back to that. We're back to the conversation is what this really boils down to, which I think is key. We're still going to make the full call. We're going to let clients know that those calls are being made, but we also want to work with them. We know that cash is a key component of their business, and having to relinquish all of it at once is tough when you're facing multiple dealers. But one other aspect of this that's key too, it's not going to completely omit or mitigate margin calls, but one thing I think the smaller, what I call the community bank mortgage issuer should know is that another aspect of this is how much notional outstanding you have will be callable or not callable. And this is the key piece that was not existent before. And something that I say I think is a good diversification tool or reason to diversify who you're facing. And I don't use this as a plug for Brent or Jim or myself, but I would say to you, and the rule is this: if you have 10 million or less in notional outstanding with any one counterparty, that broker dealer is not going to have to adhere to that regulation of 250, 255. Now, that's a regulatory call. What that means to me, and what I recommend strongly to those, would be diversify who you're faced with, your counterparties. If you're not faced with Daiwa or Baird today or JVB, I'd say sign us all up. I mean, you want to have that jump ball capability anyway, which I'll talk about, but that's a key component of this. So know that if you needed 50 million in hedging capability, they're open up 5 lines and there you're covered. In a strenuous market, I will say, look, we have the right to call, but we're just saying, we're not staring at you like we all, the larger exposure that we have. It's a great way to avoid this, and a great way to just best practice. And I'll say too, doubly, just for this system, and Agile's hosting this, which we appreciate. Again, diversification is great using a tool like Agile. So think about what you're doing here. I love the ECN because for me, it's an electronic platform where if you are signed up with all 3 of us, then you're putting it to us to get best execution, right? It's not only diversifying your exposures, but it's also a tool to give you better execution. And that's why we're such a large proponent of it. But I will say, of those two, those are the 2 key components that I see out there as important for all the attendees to hear, is that, yeah, this is coming. I doubt very, very much it's not going to be implemented. And I will share with you the reason for that. In all of the other past pushbacks, we've had these moments where a month or so out, they push it back. I've been on 5 FINRA calls in the last month and a half. One of them was with our clearing, we cleared through Pershing Boney. They are rolling this whole implementation out on the 13th of this month. And they're doing that because they want to make sure that they have their own practices in a capable way for their own reps. I do not think Boney Pershing would do such a thing if they thought this was going to pass. So, could it possibly get pushed back? Look, I thought 10 years ago we were going to be faced with this. So I will quote unquote hedge my bet a little bit. There's a potential. I really highly don't think so. Boney implementing this, 2 weeks out in advance. If it's pushed back, maybe it's a slight pushback, but I think it's here to stay.
Sounds good. Jim, any other comments?
I would just echo, obviously it's happening, right? We all know that. Our firms know that. There's a lot of work that's gone into it. And like, Tom and Brent have both mentioned, at the end of the day, it's a conversation like it always has been. We talk internally with our, credit, risk teams, finance operations. We'll continue to do that once the rule is in effect.
Sounds good. Thanks. And I do notice some questions coming in. Thank you. I am having a hard time seeing them in the box. They're like half a line of question from everybody. So I'll look to do that. But keep submitting your questions as we go. We're going to shift gears here a little bit and just talk the lender impacts. Let's dive in and look at, you know, what lenders really need to be concerned about kind of in their day-to-day operations. We've heard about the latest FINRA guidelines and things that we think obviously this is happening. But Tom, why don't you kick us off here into some day-to-day concerns from the lenders and you know, how they can calculate and think through the 250,000 threshold.
Yeah, I mean, going deeper into that threshold, we're looking at it as you know, diversification. I'll go back to that point. You know, I'm looking at all of our counterparties. You know, going back years ago, when we're looking at credits of our names and our clients, you know, we see 2 and 3 or 4 broker dealers or so they're faced with. You know, we think it will behoove you, and it's a strong you know, recommendation to keep those numbers growing, open up those relationships. This is a business like anything else. In times of stress, you're going to see these, and it was talked about briefly, Brent brought up this net capital number. Talking about that, let's get more specific. I think it's important that the attendees hear what that means. It does level the playing field for all that are going to be involved and are participating from a lender perspective in TBA. And what does that mean? So we talked all this MTA talk. Let's talk about how we face what Brent and myself and Jim are looking at. Our overall exposures, if once breached in the you know, the rule of thumb is this 25 million exposure number by our regulators. If that's in excess, and we have not taken margin by any of our counterparts, and just to give the attendees a perspective, if those kind of numbers are reached, you're talking about, let's say I have 100 counterparties that I'm faced with in TBA, and I got a $26 million you know, net cap number. That means I haven't called anybody, and I probably could have called the majority of them and gotten well underneath that number. That's why we, the broker dealers and the participants that are operating in the space, offering these lines of credit, will need to margin call. And again, it goes back to the conversation that Jim had mentioned before, and that's what I like to refer to this as. These calls are going to become just second nature. They need to be. You know, Brent mentioned this earlier about the history of it. It shocked me 10 years ago that this was not implemented. If you're an operator in TBA or any forward exposure is to derivatives, as I've been in my whole career, everything's margin called at TBA. It's shocking that it's not. So I think it's just the new normal, and that folks need to understand that this isn't something that I believe you're going to see one counterparty need to adhere to and another not. I think it's a level set. If you're another, you know, dealer size that you have this net capital number you need to manage, that's still a need. You can't ignore it. Let's say you're an entity that wants to ignore this and not call. You have that right. But the moment you hit 25 million, you know, you're done. You can't operate, and that's really important to understand from these attendees. If you're one of these dealers out there or lenders out there that are saying, okay, I'm not going to margin call you, and you're just building this exposure, well, the regulator associated with that entity, once he breaches that 25, they're going to say stop. And there's no more, you know, there's no more extension of credit. That means you can't face that counterparty. They need to get back under their number before they can resume. That's just hopefully some perspective to understand that you know, operators like ourselves are going to have to adhere to this. Not so with the teeth that we had before, or we thought we were going to have. Again, it's that discussion, but it's not going to be, you know, calls of zero out there any longer in the space.
Can I jump in real quick? I just one more point. Everything Tom said is correct. There's one more practical element too that the street has to deal with, your broker dealers have to deal with, and it just should be known, and it came up a lot in 2020 and 2021 when the market ripped higher. And that is that as a member of the MBSCC, the dealers themselves are on the hook for actually 2 payments to the MBSCC. One is basically a full mark-to-market payment without any consideration to a threshold, and the other is a VAR payment based on volatility in the market. And obviously we were in that 2020, 2021 rip, and at the end of the day, exposures were going higher quickly. And you know, at one point we were probably laying out $800 million to the MBSCC. And if you don't collect money on the other side, that's just a net flow out, and most dealers won't be able to handle that. So there's the regulatory situation that you always have to keep in mind, sort of what do you have to do? And then there's also the practical situation that you can't really lose sight of. And we saw in 2020 and 21, a couple of regional dealers seize up, and they had to kind of roll out of the business. And it got pretty serious for a while. If the market had jacked up another point or two, it would have even been way worse. So I think it's important to understand that we're obligated as broker dealers to post margin at the full amount plus the volatility number, no matter what. And that as a result of that, there is a real cost to the business if we're not collecting margin on the other side. So we're keeping in mind both the practical and the regulatory requirements here.
All right. Any perspective from you, Jim, on the general lender impacts?
No, I think Brent and Tom have covered it.
All right, sounds good. We have a couple questions, and I will take an attempt to answer one of them here, which I believe you'll test my knowledge. I've just recently got through all my FINRA regulatory stuff, so for margin calls and all that, the deep diving knowledge. But question being, is there a uniform standard established to determine the timing of the margin call delivery? And the example was, if they pay, say, 250 in a margin call, and then it ends up only being 240,000 was needed, do they get the 10,000 back? The answer would be yes. That's settled up, and you're not out the extra money because you paid too much ahead of time. And then the belief, you guys confirmed that at settlement, that all would get figured out to made whole. And if you overpaid on your margin, you'd get the remainder back at settlement.
Yeah, I mean, I think this will force people to be a little bit more proactive too. There is some language about excess margin and holding it. And they're also now that interest rates are a lot higher. It should be known that you earn interest on collateral payments that are being held at the firm. So before, back in 2020 and 21, those interest payments were minuscule because rates were at 1%. But now the rates are at 5.5%. It adds up a lot more. So I think there's going to be on the plus side, a much more proactive attitude to get money back to people, as well as getting the money in that is required.
Yep.
So some of that can come back prior to settlement if that position is warranted to do such.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, just to jump in on that, just to add to it, I would say, this is another reason why the attendee should be thinking about having that mechanism, whether it be looking at the MCT systems and Agile systems for their exposures or doing their own calculations, because that's exactly right. It's a cost for us. We're going to be paying interest on it. We are also going to be looking at the same numbers, sending them back, when needed. But we recommend strongly that these attendees here, our clients, are looking at these day-to-day calculations and asking for it back, because you don't have to wait to the end. If this mark-to-market is swung back in your favor, we certainly want to get that back to you. We certainly want to get your cash back in your hands. It's operationally key for you, and we do that all the time. So we practice what we're doing today, but I think having this implemented is just that much more of a recommendation and urgency to keep watch of that, to have somebody keeping that mark-to-market daily and asking for those calls back.
Very good. Which leads us right into our next topic here, the broker-dealer impacts. Jim, dive in and let us know some of the main impacts you've seen day-to-day from the broker-dealer side, and really what's been changing on the broker-dealer front to get ready for this and to then now get it implemented.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of this kind of goes back to what Brent was talking about in terms of more of the practical impacts. It's not just, at the end of the day, the goal of this is to exchange margin where we can, but it's not just a margin call. It's, it involves a lot of effort, especially on the broker-dealer side, from all of our internal groups, operations, finance, compliance, legal, or trading desks. It's a conversation between all parties. The mechanism to exchange margin is the Master Securities Forward Transaction Agreement. It's pretty straightforward. It's a SIFMA template. I would say if you don't already have one in place with your covered agency counterparties, start that process today. Don't put it off. It's pretty simple. It can take anywhere from a couple days to maybe upwards of a couple weeks, just depending on, the nuances. There is some flexibility built into those agreements through use of annexes. So, don't delay putting those in place. That really takes a lot of effort, just getting everyone comfortable on the same page. And at the end of the day, with the document negotiation, it's also a conversation. So a lot of effort from all parties, but at the end of the day, we're just working with you guys to make it as seamless as possible and just keep operating as usual.
Good. Any other firm impacts you guys have been noticing, Brent and Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I would just jump in and say, look, I mean, in a way, the fact that the day is here is good, because I think what's really been the most amount of work is that this has been going on for 11 years, and that we've had reiterations. We've documented people up a certain way, and then only to find out that that's not how it's going to ultimately be delivered. And so I think the fact that we're here, most people are margining already. Most people are pretty used to that. Most people have MSFTAs in place. There might be an amendment or two that we send out to make the adjustment. But it's been, my legal group, my compliance group, my operations group, the guys who are in margin, who are tracking this, and the guys who are tracking the payments. They've all been put to the test, and they've we have a lot of clients outside of originators as well. So this call is specifically about originators, but keep in mind, we have thousands of accounts on the buy side as well. Many of them are money managers and what have you that have tons of sub accounts. So it's pretty complicated in terms of making sure all those accounts are properly documented, and we have agreements in place with all of them as well. So the originators, I think, being forward sellers, have always been used to having MSFTAs to a certain extent, but some of these buy side accounts have certainly not been used to being under MSFTAs, and so that's been a lot of work on their part to get that side of the equation lawyered up.
That's good. Let's dive in a little bit, talk about the clearing impacts. A couple of you guys self-clears. Tom, you use a third party. Tom, why don't you start with a little bit of any clearing impacts you see, and then we'll flip it over to Jim and Brent to talk about the self-clearing.
Yeah, no, look, it's a very positive impact for us. We are, our principal clearing is Pershing. So when I'm in principal clearing and like self-clearing, we have the Boney standing in front of us that is making sure they're stepping up for all of our clearing transactions. Why it's such a positive for us, and it's just something to understand why, again, it becomes, I frankly believe all of this is a positive. I don't think it's a negative implementation of 4210, but specifically for us, how we're faced with this is, it might not sound like this makes sense to a lot of folks, but in the way our VAR calculation that Brent had mentioned before, and he's looking at this value at risk margin call and the value at risk calculation, when it was negative against us from our broker dealers, meaning us facing the street, so not facing the issuer side, the other side of this transaction, we would only get our positive up to zero. So, in a rates market where we're actually the other side of this trade, where it's positive exposures, not negative, which is one we all want to be much more operationally friendly, it would just go to zero and then immediately back. Now, this whole change is going to give us that positive benefit. So we are going to be positive mark to market in rate environments that move that direction, which is huge for us. We never got that benefit before. So that being a principal transaction is a large benefit for us, makes it much more operationally friendly. And on the other side of this trade, the first thing that came up on these calls that I brought up was this, because again, just to make sure everyone's aware, this 250 number that, as far as the full call versus getting back to that number, it was all new. And it affects both sides. So it's a positive effect for the issuers and these mortgage originators. It's also that way for us. So because we have a principal in front of us, we're getting the same treatment. We're getting 250 for free, essentially, before calls are made on our side. So again, very, very beneficial. I was thinking, what are the teeth here for us when we faced Boney Pershing, and what am I missing? And I'm not short of words, as you know, Greg, but I said to them, look, is this right? 250 is going to be up to free. And they said, that's exactly it. So that's the benefit we're seeing So again, I mean, I don't want to sound like flippant about it. We are going to have to live by this. I think it's right that we are. I mean, 4210 and margining, it's here. The teeth aren't as sharp at all, if anything, frankly. I think it's just the normal business practice we're all going to be getting used to.
Sounds good. Jim, any thoughts on the self-clearing? The self-clearing impacts from your guys' perspective?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, we are self-clearing. We're in an incredibly strong capital position. Gives us some flexibility where we need it. As Brent's mentioned, we do have a little bit of flexibility with the capital charges. But yeah, it's been a team effort. I can walk down and talk to the guys that are clearing these trades. So if there's ever an issue, I'm on the phone, and if anything, it's brought us together now that it's finally, coming to fruition here. But it's been a good experience.
Very good.
Yeah, and I I would say we're self-clearing as well. This is where being a primary dealer kind of helps me, because we do have a pretty big capital base, and we have kind of enough to kind of withstand normal market conditions, or even some extraneous market conditions. So we're no major issues there as well.
Sounds good. And we have another question here. I'm trying to read through it is funny how this is just a very small window, as you see me getting my progressives at the right angle to read the question. But there's a question regarding where in the rules do we see what's included and excluded from the products. Specifically excluded, it looks like where is HECM? Where are they excluded? It looks like the asker said they can see where DUS, Freddie K's, and project loans. But any guidance on where in the rules some of this guidance has come from, or have they been on some side communications from FINRA?
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I looked in the rule too and couldn't find anything on HECMs, and so I asked my own operations people, and according to them, they indicated that it was their understanding that HECMs were excluded. I knew there was a big back and forth on the agency CMBS, so that's maybe more clear. HECMs was the one I was unsure about because I couldn't find it either. So that's, let's put an asterisk next to that and say that's per my ops, but we might want to check that to make sure.
Okay, sounds good. Tom or Jim, any feedback on the rule side of things?
I would double check that. I'm looking at this from the smaller, the issuer side only, TBA, right? So I would also asterisk that as well. I don't know that to be the case, although it certainly could be. This for me is really just the bread and butter TBA trading activities we're seeing for our clients that I'm just microscoping.
All right, well, that's kind of what we have on the plate for today. Thanks, everybody. Just a couple quick notes. The FINRA website does have, if you just like Google or look up FINRA 4210 rule, you'll get a lot of it, direct snapshot into FINRA, where you can, it's detailed, it's in depth. So be ready to buckle up with a bowl of popcorn and start reading the rule. But so that it is out there for reference for those on the call that want it. We will be sending out a recording on this call, so there's parts you want to go back, re-listen to, or people in your offices weren't able to join the call. Certainly you can point them to the recording. But from my perspective, we covered a lot of ground. This has been awesome. Really, truly, thank you, the audience. Thank you guys for joining us. And one more plug for the communication and relationship. These guys live in the relationship side of this, and call them if you're not attached to these guys right now. They'd love to talk to you about opportunities to join their firms. But really, the electronic trading, it's gained efficiencies, effectiveness. But what we don't want it to do is take away the relationship. There's the quick phone calls to do a trade. That piece, yes, that part of the relationship is gone. But the extra time saved, use that to go deep with these guys. Ask them questions about their business, about your business. They want to know you guys as clients, and really it's a relationship business still. So keep forming and deepening the relationships with your broker dealers out there. Any last comments from you guys? Otherwise, we'll cut you free.
Yeah, just thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, no, greatly appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. This concludes our webcam or our webinar, and here we go. Enjoy the rest of your day and week, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.